Welcome back to Immersed in Him. These are real life miracle stories, true life miracles that have really happened. My name is Brian, and just before I get started on these 3 miracle stories, just make sure if you guys have any miracle stories that have happened to you or anybody you know, just reach out to me. My email's in the description, and we can hopefully get your story on the channel. All right, here is story number 1. Okay, this one I was undecided on whether I was going to include it or not, but the reason why I did is because I feel like, in a way, it shows God's grace. It is a little bit of a touchy subject, so be pre-warned, I guess. But it was kind of a touching story, so I decided to leave it in there. A mother wakes up at 4 a.m. to the sound of her 2-year-old laughing in the dark. The room is pitch black. No TV, no lights, no toys making noise. Just a little girl giggling at someone her mother cannot see. Then the child says something that changes her life forever. "Do you see him, Mama?" That's what she said. 3 days later, that same little girl would be rushed to the hospital unconscious, where doctors would discover terminal brain cancer. At the time, their daughter was only 2 years old, a happy little girl, playful, innocent, full of life. Her parents had no idea anything was wrong. There was no diagnosis, no warning signs, but the little girl already had terminal brain cancer, and no one knew it. One early morning, after her husband had already left for work, the mother was laying in bed beside her daughter. It was around 4 a.m. The room was completely dark, and suddenly her daughter woke up laughing. Not crying, not mumbling in her sleep, but laughing, as though somebody was standing right beside the bed entertaining her. Then the little girl looked into the darkness and asked her mother a question that made her blood run cold. Still half asleep, the mother smiled and asked, "What is so funny?" The little girl immediately responded, "Don't you see him, Mama?" The mother sat up slightly. "See who?" as she looked around the room. And then, without hesitation, the child just answered, "Jesus." The room fell silent. The mother later said that although she believed in God, the family did not attend church. They didn't pray together regularly. They didn't talk about Jesus around the house. So she had no idea how her daughter would even know the name Jesus. Her daughter never even been taught conversations about Jesus in any detailed way. But then something even stranger happened. The little girl began speaking fluently in another language. Not random sounds, not childish gibberish, an actual conversation. The mother said the child's voice carried a strong accent, almost sounding Russian even. The little girl would pause, listen, respond, as though someone invisible was speaking back to her. And even though the mother could not see anyone, she later said that she could feel a presence inside of the room, something powerful and something real. After several moments, the little girl suddenly stopped speaking and quietly said, "Okay, Jesus." Then she turned toward her mother and asked, "Do you love him?" The question hit her deeply. Confused and emotional and confounded, she answered, "Of course I do." The child then smiled softly and said, "Okay, Jesus, bye." And just like that, the conversation had ended. The room became silent again. But the feeling inside, it never left her. 3 days later, their world collapsed. The parents found their daughter unconscious in bed. Panicked, they rushed her to the hospital. Doctors began running emergency tests immediately, and they came back with devastating news. It was a brain tumor, and it was terminal. Everything changed instantly. Hospital rooms, scans, fear, surgeries, questions with no answers. The little girl underwent surgery, and somehow, through all of the terror, the mother couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in their bedroom the few nights prior. After surgery, they brought their daughter home. At one point, the family was driving together in the car, and suddenly, their daughter began speaking again, the exact same way. Another conversation with someone unseen. Another language, another strange accent, another invisible presence. This time, her husband witnessed it too, so she knew she wasn't crazy. The experience shook him so deeply, he reportedly ran the car off the road while watching it happen. And once again, their daughter finished the conversation the same way. She looked at her mother and asked, "Do you love him?" Eventually, they lost her. The brain tumor took their little girl. And for years afterwards, her mother replayed those moments over and over in her mind. The laughter and darkness, the invisible conversation, the strange language, the presence she felt but could never see. But most of all, the question, "Do you love him?" Over time, she began to believe the question was never really for the child. It was for her. But she would soon face unimaginable grief as one would. And to survive what was coming, she would need faith, trust, and unconditional love. The same kind of love that she believes Jesus once asked of his followers. Some people may explain it away. Maybe others would call it coincidence. But for one grieving mother, those moments became very sacred. Because even in the middle of unimaginable loss, she believes her daughter was never alone. And perhaps neither was she. All right, on to story number 2. This one's a little bit different, but kind of miraculous and kind of crazy at the same time. January 26, 1972, a passenger plane explodes 30,000 feet above Europe. The aircraft is ripped apart midair. Bodies fall from the sky. No parachutes, no survivors expected. But deep inside a shattered piece of the airplane, one young flight attendant is still alive. And what happened next would become one of the most impossible survival stories in human history. This is the story of Vesna Vulovic. Hopefully I said her name right. Vesna was only 22 years old. She was a flight attendant for JAT Yugoslav Airlines, a Yugoslav airline that flew across Europe during the Cold War era. Friends described her as a cheerful, ambitious, and adventurous woman, and she loved traveling, loved meeting new people, and dreamed of seeing the world. But on January 26, 1972, that dream would turn into a nightmare. That morning, Vesna boarded JAT Flight 367. The flight was traveling from Stockholm, Sweden, to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, with several stops along the way. Everything seemed normal. Passengers settled into their seats. Flight attendants prepared food and drinks. The plane climbed higher and higher into the freezing sky above Europe. Then, without warning, an explosion ripped through the aircraft. At 33,000 feet, the plane disintegrated into midair, and somehow, she was still breathing. The blast tore the airplane apart from what is now the Czech Republic. Debris scattered across miles of forest and snow-covered mountainsides. Passengers and crew had no chance. But Vesna's section of the aircraft did something almost impossible. Instead of breaking apart instantly, a piece of the fuselage remained partially intact. And inside it, Vesna was trapped. Investigators later believed a food cart pinned her inside the wreckage, preventing her body from being thrown from the aircraft. Then the entire section began falling towards the earth. For nearly 3 minutes, the wreckage plunged through the sky. No parachute, no control, no way to survive. Yet somehow, the section carrying Vesna crashed into a heavily wooded, snow-covered slope. The trees and snow abandoned some of the impact, and unbelievably, she was still alive. A local villager named Bruno Honk heard the explosion and rushed toward the crash site. What he found looked like the end of the world. Burning wreckage, twisted metal, bodies everywhere. But then he heard something, a faint sound coming from inside the destroyed fuselage. It was Vesna, barely conscious, severely injured, but alive. And the reason that mattered so much was because Bruno had actually been a medic during World War II. He knew exactly how to keep her stable until rescuers had arrived. Without him, she likely would have died in the snow before anybody ever came. Without him, she likely would have died in the snow before help ever came. Doctors could barely believe that she had survived. Her skull was fractured, her legs were both broken, several vertebrae were crushed, her pelvis was shattered. For a time, she was completely paralyzed from the waist down. Many believe she would never walk again, but over the next several months, something incredible happened. Vesna slowly began recovering. Step by step, injury by injury, she fought her way back, and eventually she walked again. The odds of surviving a fall from 33,000 feet are essentially zero. But somehow, Vesna Vulovic became the only person in recorded history to survive a fall from that height without a parachute. Investigators concluded that the plane had been destroyed by a bomb hidden inside the luggage. The attack was blamed on a Croatian extremist group during a time of intense political tension in Yugoslavia. But decades later, some journalists questioned the official story. Eventually, Guinness World Records officially recognized Vesna Vulovic for surviving the highest fall without a parachute in human history. People around the world called her the luckiest woman alive. But Vesna herself rarely saw it that way, because while she survived, 27 other people did not. She reportedly struggled with the attention for years and remained deeply humble for what had happened to her. In an interview, she often said that she didn't feel special, just fortunate. Even now, less than 50 years later, the story of Vesna Vulovic still feels less like reality and more like something out of a movie. But it happened, and to this day, nobody fully understands how she lived. I would call that a miracle. On to story number 3. A mother goes on vacation with her family and comes home fighting for her life. Within days, she's in the ICU. Her organs are shutting down. Doctors say she has almost no chance at survival. She slips into a coma, then suffers a stroke. And while machines are keeping her alive, her family is quietly being prepared for her death. But 1,000 miles away, before the doctors ever even said a word, her son says God gave him a message that she's going to be okay, but completely okay. What happened next left even the ICU staff calling it a miracle. The year was 2017. Their family had gone on vacation together. At first, everything seemed normal. But on the 3rd day, their mother started saying she didn't feel well. At first, it didn't seem serious. Maybe food poisoning, maybe a stomach bug, maybe even exhaustion. That night, she went to bed early. And while everyone else slept, she spent the night violently sick, throwing up, weak, miserable. The next morning was the family's last day on vacation. Despite barely being able to function, she forced herself through it, as most mothers do. She smiled when she could. She stayed with the family, tried to eat and act normally, but everyone could tell something was seriously wrong. Still, she refused to see a doctor. 2 days later, her husband woke up and found her unresponsive, delirious, unable to eat, unable to drink, and by the time she reached the emergency room, her body was beginning to shut down. Doctors quickly realized that this was far worse than anyone had imagined. She had developed septicemia, bacterial blood poisoning. The infection had spread throughout her entire body. One organ after another was entering crisis. Her condition became so critical, and it was so immediate. That same day, she was transferred to the ICU. And while doctors scrambled to stabilize her, her son received a phone call from over 1,000 miles away. The moment he heard, he began to pray. And almost instantly, something washed over him. Not fear or panic, but certainty. A deep, overwhelming belief that his mother was going to survive. And not just survive, but that she was going to fully recover. He couldn't explain why. Nothing medically suggested this. Nothing logically supported it. But he felt it completely in his soul. So he called his brother. And before he could even explain what he had felt, his brother said something shocking. He said, he received the exact same message while praying, that their mother was going to be okay. Together, the brothers praised God and held on to hope, even while everyone around them was losing it. Inside the ICU, things were getting worse, much worse. Their mother slipped into a coma. Organ after organ continued failing. Doctors explained that before they could even fight the infection, they had to first keep her alive. Then they would need to identify the source of the infection, then attempt the treatment. And only after all of that could they even begin talking about rehabilitation. Days passed. Then over a week, the doctors sat their father down repeatedly and prepared him for the worst. They estimated that she only had about a 5% chance of survival. At one point, they even began discussing hospice care, wills, end-of-life decisions. The family was being prepared for her death. Then suddenly, things even got worse. While in the coma, their mother suffered a stroke. Doctors noticed the left side of her body no longer responded to stimulus. They warned the family that even if she did survive, they had no idea what condition she would wake up to. Brain damage, paralysis, permanent disability, everything and anything was possible at this point. The brothers flew in that week to see her. Nothing could have prepared them for the sight. Their mother lay motionless in the ICU bed, her eyes occasionally open but rolled wildly. Her face twitched and spasmed. She looked pale, fragile, almost unrecognizable to them. Their father looked shattered, exhausted from days of fear and sleepless nights. Even the doctors, while trying to stay hopeful, spoke with grim expressions. Nothing about the situation gave anyone reason to believe that she would recover, except one thing: the message the brothers believed God had given them. Eventually, after weeks of crisis, the doctors finally discovered what caused it all. She had bacterial endocarditis, an infection that developed from a cracked vertebrae in her neck. The bacteria eventually broke free, entered her bloodstream, and spread throughout her entire body. Surgeons immediately prepared for an extremely dangerous operation. Going through the front of her neck, they would remove the infection and fuse the damaged vertebrae. But even if surgery succeeded, there was terrifying risk: damage to her vocal cords, damage to her spinal cord even, permanent paralysis, loss of speech. No one knew what was going to happen. But then, slowly, the impossible began happening. Weeks later, she broke from the coma, alive, aware, and even recovering. Doctors soon realized something unbelievable. Despite the surgery, there was no spinal cord damage, no vocal cord paralysis, and even more shocking, despite at least one stroke, there appeared to be no lasting neurological damage. No paralysis, no cognitive decline, no obvious effects whatsoever. Day by day, she grew stronger, and after 55 days inside the ICU, the woman doctors thought would die walked out of the hospital under her own power. The medical staff couldn't believe it. An ICU nurse admitted that he had never seen someone arrive in such catastrophic condition and later walk out of the hospital on their own will. Doctors call it miraculous. And on the day she was discharged, something extraordinary happened. The doctor who treated her, along with several nurses, gathered together beside her for a prayer of thanks to God. Even they struggled to explain what they had witnessed. Her mother would go on to live another 7 years, years filled with family, faith, and life. And after everything she had experienced in that ICU, she became a devoted believer. She often said that God had allowed her to go through the darkness so she would truly know Him, God. Earlier that February, she passed away peacefully. But for her family, the story didn't end in that hospital room. Because while doctors saw impossible odds, they saw something else. They saw hope. And they still believe that even in the darkest moments, everything was always in God's hands, as it always is. And one day, they believe they'll see her again.